Hi all, today we're talking about communication and identity, coincides with chapter 4 in your textbook. The very first thing we need to do is define what is identity. Well, how we're using this word, identity is what makes you definable, recognizable, and unique. So this includes the categories within which you belong, your self-affiliation, how you affiliate who you are with groups to which you belong and who you are as a unique individual. And essentially, in the simplest of terms, it's how we see ourselves. Our identity is how we see ourselves, who we see ourselves as being, who we are to us. It's all of these things. So identity is a really important thing for scholars to understand. It's such an important correlate with how we behave, how we think, and also even how others behave toward us. Okay, so that's what identity is, how we see ourselves, really, what makes us definable, recognizable, and unique. So let's dig in here. There are different types and levels of identity. At the individual level, that's how we see who we are as a person. Also at the relational level, which your book talks about on page 84, I'm talking about real relational cultures, the family level, the cultural level, and then the social level. So keep in mind that for a cultural identity to be truly shared, communication is necessary. How are you going to share who you are and how you see yourself if you don't communicate that? And this is also where channels come into play. So there's a text section in your book about this too, a little bit later. So it's interesting. We see in the literature that mind reading is something that family members talk about as desirable. What? Mind reading? We can't read minds. Sure, we cannot read minds. But when people talk about their families, one of the things that John Coughlin found is that when he asked them, well, what do you want your family members to do or be? They said, I want them to know what I need or what I'm thinking without me having to say it. I want them to be able to read my mind. So that really intrigues me as a scholar, and it's linked to dissatisfaction, actually. And its pursuit can often lead to or coincide with sulfuric acid, sarcasm, belligerence, eye rolls, and scoffs. So we can't read each other's minds, and we communicate, and that's how we know what we're thinking and feeling. And maybe participants who say this really are just getting this idea of I want someone to know me so well that when I communicate just the littlest thing, a shift of the eyes, a downward look, just a slight change, they'll know from previous experiences what that change means. Maybe that's really what they're getting at when they say mind reading, but of course we can't read minds, and we get ourselves into trouble assuming that we can and assuming that other people can or should. So these ideas that I'm talking about, they're not mutually exclusive. So let's deal a little bit more into identity. So let's talk about you. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. There's a lot on this slide, but I encourage you to sit back and just listen. This is an example. So I told you about those levels of identity. So I'm going to give you an example for myself. So at the individual level, as a professor, a wife, a mother, a friend, a daughter, I see myself in all of those positions, and in those positions, what's unique about me, who I am, is someone who really values kindness and competence. Those are goals that I have as an individual. And I'm also really hopeful, and as you can tell, I'm really informal. Those are things that make me unique, and they really are important to how I see myself and how I want to live my life. At the relational level, my identities are ones of gender flexibility. So I really am someone who, in my relationships, I'm not bound by, you're more masculine, you do this, I'm more feminine, I do this. I like things to be flexible, and I don't like limits, and I don't like rules. So in my relationships, I don't want rules either. I want things to be flexible. A job needs to be done, just go in there and do it. And so co-parenting is an important thing to me. And also in my relationships and my family's particular, playfulness is really important. When I think about my relationships and who I am in those relationships and what those relationships mean to me, they're playful. At the family level, I see myself and I see my family as hardworking, we're committed to each other, and we really value fairness, but we also value other people over ourselves. So in my family, growing up, part of who we were, which was communicated through behaviors and explicit and implicit messages, was that in this family, we care about other people so much that we'll put their needs ahead of our own. Doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves and do what's best for us, but we focus on other people first. And so that was part of my family identity growing up, and that you work hard and you're committed to each other, and fairness is really important. So then at the cultural level, moving outward, my identity is one, I'm from the East Coast, so I kind of identify with that. I really identify with the whole WVU culture. That's important to me. That's, I wear the gear. I love it. And also I identify with Midwest America because I lived in Nebraska for a bit and I loved that too. I've got some Irish-German heritage, but these aren't very salient to me. The Irish-German thing, that's not really on my radar. I don't think about it a lot. So this brings up a really important point. Salience. So let's talk about, I'm going to circle it annoyingly, salient, salient, salient. So when something is salient, it means that it essentially rises to the top. It rises to the top. It becomes important. Now, some pieces of our identity are salient all of the time. For example, the playfulness, the informality, the kindness, working hard, these are pretty much always salient to me. I am always like, that's an important part of who I am and the relationships and my family, the groups to which I belong. It's always important. But other parts of me, like even the gender flexibility, isn't always a really important thing. Sometimes I'm not even thinking about it. It's not on my radar. But you are going to have pieces of your identity that are very salient often or very salient very seldom. For instance, unless someone, I don't know, made a joke about Germans that was really, really nasty, maybe then it would become a little bit salient to me. But it's not really a big deal. Now, if someone said something about WVU, like students who go to WVU are as good as students as those that go to this university, that's a strong part of my identity. And in that moment, my WVU loyalty would be amplified. It would be more salient. It would rise to the top. So it's always there. But when something's salient, it means it becomes very important to us. Okay? So for instance, for you, you may think that your gender flexibility is not really even something that you would write down, when asked what's your identity. But when you, as let's say a woman going into a statistics class, and someone makes a comment like, oh, you're pretty good at this for a girl, or you as a man are in a social science class, and someone says, wow, you're really great at talking about your emotions, especially for a man, that might make that gender flexibility salient because you think, shut up, that's really rude, that's really an awful thing to say, kind of couched as a compliment. Gross. And so that makes that part of your identity salient. You understand. That's what salience is all about. It can change, but some are going to be salient often, some are going to be salient almost very, very minimally for a long amount of time. So now, in talking about the next component, the social groups are those to which you belong. And so I really like groups that are dedicated to social justice, and I like groups that are dedicated to hope because I'm a really hopeful person and I have a lot of faith. So I belong to a church that that's a big part of my identity. I love that group. And it allows me to tap into, as you're seeing here, an important part of myself, a few important parts of myself. So that these line up makes me happy. When we don't, discomfort surmounts. So what we see in individuals is that if they are, say, someone who's full of hope, but then they belong to maybe a religious organization or an organization on campus, or they go to work at a job where hope is something that's really squelched, they are going to feel a lot of discomfort there because they can't be who they are. You may think, oh, this is a no-brainer, but it's amazing as a society that we don't understand this yet. When people can't be who they are and tap into the parts of themselves that they see as unique, as important. They become very dissatisfied and not as productive and not as effective. So our best bet is to find ways to get to know people and to let them talk and come out about who they are. And then help them find ways in our groups, in our relationships, where they can be who they are, and we can work together at nurturing parts of our identities and accepting people, not just tolerating, but accepting people for who they are. And it's funny, we have a hard time sometimes seeing it in other people, but when we think about ourselves and who we are, and then we imagine being in situations or draw on experiences when we haven't been able to be who we are, our relationships squelch that, our workplace squelch that, the groups to which we belong to squelch that. That discomfort, we remember that, right? And how hard it can be. And especially in family relationships, when your family is in juxtaposition to how you see yourself, that's a hard road to walk. So there's some theories about that too that we'll talk about more in CommCh4 and other classes with me if you take intergroup with me. And aging, we talk about that more too. But I mention it here, and I want you to certainly know this idea of salience and that we want all of the layers of our identity to match up. Our various identities become salient at different times, so I just gave you a couple examples here. So your relational identity, you might bond a ritual like Shabbat or First Communion or Thanksgiving dinner and then a football game out in the grass with your family. Or you might bond there, you might realize that you're not on the same page. So for example, we see the book talks about when one sibling is favored or when partners have different worldviews, how that can be hard for them. And this is an example. Family day can be salient when you're interacting with your family or when you're without your family for a long period of time. Then we realize, wow, there are things about my family that I never even realized were a thing because it's part of our culture, but wow, they're really important to my family, really important to me. Or maybe when you're with the new dating partner's family, you realize, whoa, your family identity is about this, and my family identity is about something very different. At Christmas, you're all about, or Hanukkah, you're all about gifts. That's not important to my family's identity. But I see that's about the giving and sharing. So I'm going to try and understand you better, but it makes my family identity very salient that we're one that it's more about how we talk to each other at these holidays. We don't even exchange gifts anymore. Culture identity and presidential executive orders. I think that this is a pretty interesting one. So when we're talking about when the president makes comments about culture or makes rulings about culture, this is also true about race. You know, this is a time when a lot of people who don't really think about their culture that much are like, oh, yeah, this is salient. This is salient when our culture is threatened. We tend to, our ears perk up. You can think of that as salience too. And then gender identity and vulgar sexist jokes. That's just an example of you might, when you hear a vulgar comment or a sexist joke, all of a sudden you're thinking, woo, I'm a lady, or I'm a dude, or I'm transgender. I do not care for that. That identity becomes salient. When you're just sitting in that math class and you're learning about math, you may not be thinking about your gender. Also, WVU identity and media coverage of those riots. You remember that. Your ears perk and you watch that coverage really heavily and you're thinking, why are they portraying us in such a stereotypical way? Your identity was salient. I bet you didn't like it. Personal identity, Thanksgiving dinner dialogue about those people. When you have Thanksgiving dinner with your family and you realize that those people is you, or those people are the people that you love from school or work, woo, doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good. Okay, and it becomes salient. So remember that we have this reciprocal approach to communication and identity, like so many things. Our identity influences how we communicate, and then how we communicate influences our identity. So I used that mother-son example before. So here's just another way to talk about that. So when I say to people, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Billy's mom. And when Billy says, mommy, or when I read a book with him, when we're talking to other grown-ups about mommy things, all of these things demonstrate how communication and identity are reciprocally linked. And ethnic identity, here are just some examples. You might wear clothing that shows your ethnic identity. You might also hear ethnically linked jeers or praise by others, and this shows how communication and identity are linked. Whose identity is it anyway? Well, identity refers not only to how we see ourselves, but how we see others in reference to ourselves. So personal, we think about how similar are you to me? Family, how much are you part of my family? That's that shared family identity we talked about. Culture, how much do you share my culture? Social, how similar am I or you to this social group? And these tend to intersect and, again, salient at different times. So a couple other things that I want to go over about some context for communication identity and how they're linked. First is rules. We talked about them last unit. So rules are these prescriptions for behaviors. They say this is a desirable or accepted or welcome behavior versus an unacceptable, undesirable, unwelcome behavior. And they help keep things stable in the family, and they teach us how to behave. They could be stated explicitly. This rule is that you do not stay out past 10 o'clock. Or it could be implicit. No one ever says you can't stay out past 10 o'clock, but when you show up at 10:15, your parents go, whoa, why were you out so late? That's an implicit rule, right? One implicit rule that I have in my house was to not be disrespectful. You must always be respectful. No one said that much that I even remember, but any kind of disrespect shown by other people, I mean, it just got such a negative reaction that I knew I wasn't to be disrespectful. I was always to be respectful. And it works best when negotiated, when the family members work it out together. And you remember that from last unit when we were talking about when families are more flexible, that's useful. And when rule makers, the ones making the rules, are willing to adjust and recalibrate. Meta rules are rules about rules. So a meta rule is something like the mom's the one who does the rule making and the dad's the one who disciplines. Okay? And that taps in a little bit to rules. But what that also says is the rule maker can do this and can't do that. And then rules about communication. We have some of those. Secrets. Boundary formation, modification. Your book talks about these in good amount. It includes stigmatized topics. So Gottman says that we have this universal avoidance and a negative connotation. So people use the word stigmatized a lot, and they overuse it, I think. For something to be stigmatized, it means that it's pretty much a universal negative connotation. Not just some people think it's bad or some people turn their nose up at it. If something is stigmatized, that means that people avoid it or they think bad things of it. They just don't talk about it. So deaths of young children are things that socially people they avoid talking about. Sexual abuse is a stigmatized thing. Suicide. So you can have those big topics that are really stigmatized, but we also see within your family you might avoid certain topics, but that doesn't mean that all people do. So types of secrets are on page 93, and so surprises, those are considered sweet. Sweet secrets, those where we discuss our fears and insecurities, are considered essential, and they have little smiley faces because those are helpful to family functioning. We also have toxic secrets, those that burden or mystify the family. Dangerous, those that are deadly to keep. And you can see that stigmatized list, for example, death of a young child, sexual abuse, suicide, addiction is moving out of the stigmatized category. So is mental illness. It's moving out because we're getting more comfortable talking about that. Your book talks a lot about storytelling. Don't forget the socialization component and review those functions to help solidify your understanding of these. I want you to keep in mind that when men and women share stories, the women are less concerned with chronological order. Men are more concerned with that. Women jump all around in the story. So those are all the black text. Those are new things I want you to think about, but there's a lot of blue, a lot of good stuff in the text. Finally, just one more thing on identity here. Rituals. Rituals are not habits. Rituals are not habits. I'm going to ask you that on a true and false question. I'm going to ask you about rituals, or are they habits? And you're going to tell me false. Rituals are not habits. Rituals are reoccurring. They may extend beyond one relationship. They're patterned. They pay homage to something sacred, but not always something positive, although I hope that was the case in your family. And they involve 2 or more people. They're voluntary. They demonstrate who you are to yourselves and to the world, and it affects whom you are. So examples of this I mentioned already: a Thanksgiving Day football game, a wedding, a weekly date. A ritual is something that you do with another person, and it signifies something about your relationship and also brings your relationship to a new place. So for example, if you sit and have a glass of wine and take a bubble bath every night, that's not a ritual. That's a habit, and you love it. And you might say, I need this, and it's good for me. Okay, great. But unless you're also FaceTiming with a friend while you're doing it, it's not a ritual. It has to involve that other person. Now, rituals can be negative, but research tends to focus on the positive. It's hard to get people to talk about their negative rituals, but it may be that when you have that Thanksgiving Day football game, part of that ritual is at the end to peg your little brother with the football. And your little brother may not see that as a very positive thing. It signifies something about the relationship, doesn't it? It says something. It says that this is someone that we sort of beat up on and tease and make fun of. So not always positive. They definitely say things about that relationship. So that's it for this chapter. Do not forget to do a discussion question and answer, just one for this unit. So you can do chapter 3, you could do chapter 4, you could do a combo if you want to do that and talk about both, or you could do just one of the chapters. And if you're going to focus on chapter 3, you can go ahead and design that study that I talked about last time. Or you can follow the traditional format that's in the description of discussion question and answer. Then also for this unit, you are going to take that test. Do your best. And I'll have a review sheet coming at you. If not already, make sure that you ask me for it. I release those to you to help you, if you like review sheets, to help you be successful.